us East Valley tonight, if you're willing and able, you want to sing with us, why don't you stand? If you like a hymnal, you can turn to page 170, first and last, of Down at the Cross.
Amen. Thank you so much. You may be seated. It is good to see all of you in the service tonight. I am so glad that you are here. We're continuing what we have called our Sunday night revival series with Brother Dan Houghton. I'll say a little bit more about him in just a moment, but I'm glad that you are here. God certainly spoke to our hearts this morning, didn't he? Amen. And so I'm glad to have you back, excited to see what the Lord is going to do for us in the service tonight. Do remember, we have a memorial service here tomorrow. Brother Tom Mullins service here at 11 o'clock, viewing at 10, service at 11. And if you can help with some side items, we're feeding the family and anybody else after the service tomorrow, then please do so. And then do remember, next Sunday night, Brother Stephen Hood, who is the pastor at the West Valley Free Will Baptist Church, will be here preaching for us as we continue our Sunday night revivals. And pray for that service. Be here if you at all possibly can. And many of you have met Brother Stephen. Just a great testimony. He just recently answered a call to preach, just a little while ago, and now he's pastoring that church. And I've really gotten to know him and his family a little bit, and I think you'll enjoy them. And then, of course, sign up out there in the foyer. If you can, April the 3rd, we're going to deliver eggs to people's homes, hide some of the eggs in their yards, and then we're going to stuff eggs for our big community Easter egg hunt on Sunday afternoon. So help us with that if at all possible. If you're willing and you're able, we'd love to have your help with that. Well, let's all stand together again as Brother Billy comes and leads us in another hymn.
If you like a hymnal, you can turn to page 450, first, second, last. Just so sweet and trusting. On the first. Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to rest upon His promise, just to know that said the Lord, Jesus, Jesus, how I trust. offering, as we give back as God has blessed. I'm going to ask Brother Chris Abernathy if he would go to the Lord in prayer for us. Amen. You may be seated.
So I have been corrected. It's not Dan Houghton. It's Dan Houghton. He said it upset him when people said his name incorrectly. Actually, I asked him if I had said it right. We just all assumed I was saying it wrong, right? I met Brother Dan and his wife. I'm privileged to be on the North American Ministries Board, and I was on the board that approved them to go. I was the only no vote, but anyway, the vote went forward anyway, majority rules. And he and his wife are we'll be planning a church in Vermont, as we've been talking about. Brother Dan, I'll let him tell as much about himself as he wants to, but he was youth pastor for several years with a friend of mine, Brother Scott Coghill, in North Carolina. He spent, I think he said 12 years in the corporate world after he got out of the military, and now God has called him to plant a church. And so I'm excited for him to be here. He is out here for a conference this week, and we're excited that he is able to be with us. Actually, Dan is the reason why we're having a Sunday night revival series. He was the first one we scheduled, and then someone else called for the end of the month. I said, man, I can't give all my Sunday nights away in 1 month, and then I decided to do that anyway. Just thought it would be something different for us to do. And so I'm excited to hear Brother Dan. He's going to share a little bit about his ministry. He's going to preach for us. Just before he does that, Dylan and Ella are going to come and sing for us.
When shadows fall and the night covers all, there are things that my eyes cannot see. I'll never fear, for the Savior is near. My Lord abides with me. How can I fear? Jesus is He ever watches over me. Worries all cease, He gives me giving peace. How can I fear with Jesus? When I'm alone and I face the unknown and I fear what the future may be, I can depend on the strength of my friend. He walks along with me. How can I fear? Jesus is He ever watches over me. Worries all cease, He gives me giving peace. How can I fear with Jesus? Jesus is King, He controls everything. He is with me each night and each day. I trust my soul to the Savior's control. He drives all fear away. How can I fear? Jesus is He ever watches over me. Worries all cease, He gives me giving peace. How can I fear with Him?
Well, good evening. It is good to see you. I was going to do something, and the last time that I did it was actually when I was presenting to the board before we got through. And my father used to tell me to do this all the time, and every time I spoke in front of a group of people, to just figure out what the level of intelligence of the audience was. And so he said, do you remember this? Okay. And it works every single time. So if you ever are speaking in front of a group of people and you want to know how quickly you can talk or what type of words if you can use big words or you have to dumb it down to be real small words, here's what you do. You look at people's hands. And you can tell from people's hands, and I love it that when you, in churches especially, you can shake hands so you can look at people's hands and not look like a creeper. But you watch people's hands, and if their ring finger is longer than their middle finger, they're the fast ones, and all the slow ones just look at their hands. So I know I need to bring this down a little bit. So let me introduce my family. Here's what I want to do tonight. I want to introduce my family to you. I want to introduce our work to you. And then I want to share with you from Acts 1, I want to share with you something that radically changed my life. So real quick, my family. I have a slide up here, I think they have a slide that has my family on it. I have been married to my wife now this year, this July, will be, excuse me, I'm sorry for hitting that, will be 20 years. I've been married to my best friend, and it's been awesome. My wife is from Vermont. My family is from Vermont as well. But we got married the year after high school.
About 2 years ago,
So
we were
I
on a walk talking
proposed
about all the
actually
things that God
on
had done in our life
graduation day.
recently. Brought us to a question of what would be next? We knew God was calling us to something, we just didn't know what that something was. And that sparked the question of, what if God called us to plant a church in an area where people were far from Him?
And that started us on a long prayer journey. We knew God was calling us to something, we just really didn't know what it was. Once we realized it was church planting, then we didn't know where it was. So eventually God made it very clear to both of us that it was Burlington, Vermont.
But we have 3 kids. Our oldest is 18. His
Burlington
name is Dylan.
has around 80,000 people in it,
Which
and the
to
county
me
that
just
it's in
blows my
has
mind.
around
I see
300,000.
these young kids here, and
The
people said to
state
me
tops
my
the
whole
charts
life when my
in
kids
the
were growing
least
up,
religious state in
"Don't
the
blink
U.S.,
because it goes quick."
as well as the
And now I'm telling people that I have a child in college, and that's so odd to me. But he is in Pensacola, Florida, at Pensacola Christian College, and he's loving it. He actually is starting to work out, and he's always been big structured, and he just started working out, and he is getting huge. To the point to where he has now, even through the military, my max ever was 225 on the bench press, and he just beat me. And he sent me a video of him maxing it at 235 and said, "Sorry, old man, I just one upped you." And I didn't like that. So any guy here, you know you remember back to the day to where you finally beat your father at something? Like I used to wrestle my dad when I was in high school, and I remember the day when I came back from the military and I beat him. And I made him tap. And I'm scared for this summer. Because Dylan is coming home, and I'm not looking forward to him making me tap. But I think it's coming. Our second oldest is CJ. He is 15. He is awesome. He's the more laid back, more chill type kid, and he's the jokester of the family. Always telling jokes. He's awesome. He's right now he's going through driver's ed. He gets permit. He's loving that. Our youngest is Kylie, and she is 14. She just turned 14 a couple weeks ago, and she is the most convicting little girl I've ever met because she's so kind. Everywhere we go, she looks for things to compliment people on, literally everywhere we go. If we're at a grocery store, a gas station, anything, if she sees someone, she will compliment them on something that they're wearing or something that they have. She'll be like, "Oh, sir, I like your shoes." Like every time I feel like, man, I'm the worst ever. I'm not nice to people because she's so kind. She's always thinking about others. Even she's got 2 older brothers, and she's always like, when we go somewhere, she's like, "I gotta buy this for Dylan and CJ," and they're so mean to her all the time. Like they're never nice, and she's always looking out for them. But we have had the opportunity. My kids were born in North Carolina. We've been in North Carolina since we got married. So my wife and I got married. She moved out of Vermont, and she had never been anywhere besides Vermont, and then except for college, and she had never lived anywhere besides Vermont. And we moved to North Carolina, and that's where we have been for the last 20 years. And my kids have grown up there. They've grown up at Scott's church and have loved it. We've been able to. I don't hear it very often, but I get to say to people that I've been married to my best friend, and our family always has fun. Let me tell you a little bit about Vermont, and then I'll go into kind of our ministry there. Vermont is a very weird place. There's been a couple of people that have said they've been there. Who's been to Vermont ever? Raise your hand. Okay. There's been some churches that I've gone to that adults have literally asked me, "What state is Vermont in?" It's like, it's its own state. So I have to tell that to people sometimes because it's very small. It's way up north, but they are very odd. I would say if you were to describe the people that live in Vermont, you had a bunch of hippies move there back in the 60s, and they had kids, and they call themselves hipsters. And so you either have mountain men or hipsters now in Vermont. And then Burlington, Vermont is Vermont will say that Burlington is not part of Vermont because Vermonters are all they're all woodsy type people. They don't have anything big box anywhere. Burlington is really the hub of Vermont. But Vermont you will never see a billboard in Vermont. There's no buildings that are above 10 stories high because they do not want to distract from the tree line and the view of Vermont. They are very anti-big box. So we have 3 Walmarts in the whole state. In North Carolina, we had 3 Walmarts within 10 minutes from us. There's no Chick-fil-A. There's one Taco Bell near us that is almost in Canada. So my daughter loves Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell. And when I told her we have to take a ferry to Chick-fil-A, she was like, Dad, are you sure God called us there? They're very well known for maple syrup. Right now is maple syrup season. And here's the cool thing. I've got 10 trees tapped right now. So my son, right before I got here, my son texted me and said, hey, I got another 3/4 of a bucket full. I was like, yes. So it takes, I don't know if you know this, I'm learning all this stuff right now. It takes 40 gallons of sap from a tree to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. So we boiled some down and I burned it. I did a horrible job. It looks like motor oil. I would show you a picture. It did not come out well. So I burned it in the pan, and then I realized, okay, you got to add more water to it because it's burning in the pan. It's just going to fry. So I went and got water from a hose. You ever tasted water from a hose? The syrup tastes like that. I have that like metallic taste from a water hose in the syrup. So we tried it once, and we're throwing that out. We're going to try it again. But they also get a ton of snow. There's still snow on the ground right now. Actually, last week we had 3 days that it was in the 50s, and a lot of the snow has melted, but there's still snow on the ground. They get an average of around 6 feet of snow every year. And so it is, right now it's about 20 degrees there, and it'll stay that way for probably the rest of March. It'll fluctuate between 20 and 50. But that's Vermont. I want to share with you the biggest question we get about when I tell people that we're going to Vermont. And people always ask this: why Vermont? So in order for me to tell you that, I've got to share with you 3 things. I need to share with you our calling, I need to share with you our story, and our reason. So let me share with you our story. My story, when my wife and I graduated from high school, I was raised in a preacher's home. My father was a pastor. My father was a drill sergeant when I was younger. When he got out of the military, he actually moved back home. My parents are both from Vermont. He moved back home. So when people ask me where I'm from, I don't really know. My dad was in the military when I was younger, and we moved. My mom and I counted it up when I graduated high school, 53 houses. So we had been really everywhere. So when my dad got out of the military, we moved back to Vermont. And he started or took over a small church there. And so I grew up in a Christian home. When I graduated high school, there was a slow fade that started to happen. I joined the military and started finding out that, if you're a Christian in the military, it's very hard to get in front of the right people. And so I started hanging out with the wrong people, which in their eyes was the right people. And I started slowly fading away from what God had called me to do. I knew in high school God had called me to be a pastor. And so I started this slow fade, and it ended up to the point where I was socially drinking with these guys. And I started getting very far away from where Christ had called me to be. And then one moment in the military, right after I'd come back from a deployment, my wife and I were packing to move into our first house. She was pregnant with our first son, and I was putting the last mattress. We had moved everything to the house. We had the mattress that we had slept on the night before. I had strapped it to the top of the SUV that we had, and I had these bungee cords that ran through the windows. And as I walked by it, which every guy knows this, when you strap something down, you got to test it one time and say, that's not going anywhere. So when I did that, I pulled on the bungee cord, the hook on the other end straightened. And the last thing I heard and remember was the sound of the bungee cord coming at my face. And the bungee cord hit my eye and exploded my eye, broke my nose across the bridge, shattered my eye socket. And I remember waking up to my wife pushing me, which, by the way, this had to have been a great sight. My wife was 9 months pregnant. She was pushing me in a wheelchair in the Army Medical Center. So I'm in the military. And it looks like there's nothing wrong with me because she put sunglasses on me, and she's 9 months pregnant, pushing me through there. Anyway, I woke up to that, and then, long story short, I found out that I would never have sight centrally in my right eye again. It put a scar on the back of my macula, and so I cannot see through it. If you're familiar with macular degeneration, that's basically what happened to me in one instant. And so I can't see anything central in this eye. And if you look at this eye, you'll notice that this eye is always dilated, it never dilates. It's just the full pupil. So to this day, I don't have any central vision in this eye. I don't know if you know about the military, but they don't have much use for you when you can't see out of your good eye. And so they told me I could either take a medical retirement, or I could have a desk job and never do any cool military thing again. And so I took the medical retirement. And I had only been in 3 years in the military, and I had loved my job. I got to jump out of planes. That was my favorite thing. I was with 7th Special Forces Group, absolutely loved what I was going to be able to do with them for the rest of the career that I had planned with them. And very quickly, that all ended. And I had a choice whether to accept what God was doing in my life or get angry. And I got pretty angry. And I blamed God for ruining the rest of my life. And I ended up going back to a job that I had done in high school. I'd worked with cell phones, so I started working for Verizon Wireless as until I get the real job type job. And that quickly became a career. And I started doing really, really well with them. And at this point, my slow fade had become very quick. And I had been hanging out with the wrong crowd. However, in their eyes, it was the correct crowd. And I was more than socially drinking. I had become an alcoholic. I was now socially doing drugs with people. I was so far from Christ. There were months that I don't remember because I was not sober the entire time. I was doing really, really well in my career. I was advancing really quickly. I had become one of the youngest managers of a store with over 30 employees in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They were traveling me all over the place to share how we were doing so well in the store that we were in. They moved me up to multiple different positions to where I ended up getting a position which brought me to Newbern, North Carolina. And I got a promotion as a data consultant that would travel kind of the coast, and I could pick anywhere that I wanted to go. And at this point, right before I had moved there, my mother had come over and told me that I needed to go see counseling. That some of my friends had contacted her and said, he's got a problem. And I told her, don't ever talk to me again. And for 1.5 to 2 years, my mother and I didn't speak. She was the principal of the school that my kids were going to, and I would see her almost every day, and I would look her in the eyes, and I would turn away and walk. And it was the farthest, the deepest I had ever felt. I had to continue to drink to numb the pain and to numb conviction in my life. That promotion that brought me to Newbern, North Carolina, my parents found out that that's where I was moving, was Newbern, North Carolina, and they found out that there was a school starting, a Christian school starting in that town. And so they reached out to the person, the pastor of the church that was starting that school, which happened to be Scott Coghill. And they went and had a meeting with him, and I was furious because now my parents are following me and I want to get away from them. And they had this meeting with Scott Coghill, and Scott hired them almost on the spot, which is something he never normally does. And when my mom walked into his office, he's a huge Carolina fan. He has Carolina stuff everywhere. And I'm a huge Duke fan. So when my mom walked into his office, she said, "Oh, my son would hate your office." And he said, "Oh, he must be a Duke fan." And they were talking. He said, "Well, if your son's a real Duke fan, tell him to come to my church and say it to my face." So literally the only reason I went to his church was to walk up to him and tell him that Duke is better than Carolina. I promise you that's the only reason I went there. My mother told me about this. I was mad that my mom got a job. She was following me here. She told me about this pastor, but I'm that much of a Duke fan that I went to the church to tell him to his face that Duke is better than Carolina. And while I was sitting there, I remember sitting in the balcony on the back row. At some point in his message, I stopped hearing him, and the Holy Spirit started preaching to me. And he preached my entire life. And it was as if my eyes were opened for the first time to how far from Christ I was and how I had wasted the last 7 to 9 years of my life just absolutely trying to do my own thing, trying to fulfill success, trying to make money, trying to succeed at things that were wrong. And it was in that moment I remember just breaking down. We left there. My parents were actually staying at our house. And my mom thought that I was really mad because I wasn't talking. And I remember the moment my parents walked out of the house, I walked into my kitchen and started dumping alcohol in tears. And my wife started crying. And she said, I've been praying for this day. And it was the day that I will never forget, because it was the day that God took a broken person and redeemed him. And it was the day that my story changes, and the day that God started using my life for something what he had actually created me for. And instead of doing what God had created me for, I decided to do what I wanted to do. And in this moment, I decided I'm not being a fake Christian anymore. I'm not being the type of person that says he's a Christian but lives a completely separate way. And it was in that moment that God started bringing me back to where he wanted me to be. And it took about a 2-year process for him to bring me from where I had put myself to bring me back into the place that he wanted me to be. And from there, I could tell you so many stories of things that happened over and over of God working in my life and working in my family's life, and the things that my kids would say, like, Dad, it's so good to have you back. And that to me was so awesome. And then to watch God do specific things in my life, and I started working with Stephen Kimbrell in the youth ministry, and he asked me to come and help with them while I was there, and I fell in love with working with teenagers. And then Stephen said that he was going to California to plant a church, and I was like, boom, we're going. We're going to be there. I was still with Verizon at the time, and I said, there's actually a corporate Verizon store in Irvine, and I can go work at that store, and we'll be perfect. I know a guy that works there. And I thought we were going, and we started praying through it, and God said, I have something for you here. And I had no clue what that was. We said, okay, we'll stay here. And so I started, after Stephen left, I started volunteering in the youth ministry just until Scott hired a new youth pastor. I had no intentions of working there. I was making really, really good money with Verizon. When I was 25, I broke $100,000 with Verizon. At this point, it was now 5 years later, and I was making really, really good money with them. And I remember the day that Scott said, what would you think about coming on staff here as a youth pastor? And I was like, okay. And he told me the pay. I said, okay. Let me pray about it. And so we started praying through what that would look like. And I remember saying, God, if that's what you want me to do, make it very clear. Literally 5 days later, I got a phone call from Verizon that said, we're eliminating your position. You can either take another job that's going to be more money, but you would have to move to somewhere that has a corporate headquarters somewhere. And you can either do that, or we'll give you a severance package it will give you so much money for every year that you've been here. And so we took a severance package, and I left Verizon. At that point, I told Scott, I was like, I quit today. He was like, I can't bring you on until next year. And I was like, it's okay, I got a severance package. What's cool is that God worked that severance package to work all the way, almost to the day to when Scott could actually hire me on full-time there. So we left this corporate job to go work as a youth pastor, and I have never, I don't know how to explain this to people, but when that happened, I felt like we had more money as a youth pastor making $35,000 than I ever did making $150,000 at Verizon. I don't know how to explain that. But God has blessed us so much when we gave our life to him. And through that, after a couple of years in that, Scott and I started talking about what would be next. What would be the next thing that we would do after being a youth pastor? Because Mark Cash used to be the oldest youth pastor, and then when he moved to the executive pastor, that made me the oldest youth pastor in our circle, and I didn't like that, and I hated Mark for that. Because now all the younger youth pastors were like, oh, the old guy's now Dan. I hated that. So we were talking about what would be next. And so I said, if I were to do anything, it would be planting a church. I want to go plant a church somewhere where people are far from Christ. And I don't know where that is, but that would be what we would want to do. But we had bought a home when I was with Verizon. We were able to pay off the majority of it while I was with them. It had 20 acres. It had a horse barn. We had horses at one point. It had a creek that ran through it. It had a pond. I could hunt. Everything on that property, and I loved it. And we were like, you know what, we'll plant a church somewhere that's within driving distance of our home. So we don't know where that's going to be, but it's got to be somewhere here, because this is going to be our forever home. We're never leaving this place. So we started, praying through where that would be and where God would bring us. And I remember in 2018, we were really praying. We knew that God was about to do something, and Hurricane Florence came through. And Hurricane Florence, I don't know if you guys remember this, but it wrecked our town. Our town looked like a third world country when it came through. Our house took 6 feet of water in it. I had to kayak from our front gate, over the front gate, over the horse barn to get to our house. And when I walked in the house and saw everything floating, you would have thought that would have devastated us. And what it did, it made it very clear that we're not putting our treasure in a house, that we want to follow God wherever that is. And it was almost like a very clear statement from God that says, you know what? You don't need this house to be happy. And through everything that happened with that flood, God did some awesome things through his people that was so cool for us to see and so cool for my kids to see, that people of God came around us, and a family that we didn't even know gave us a house to live in and paid for literally everything. And all through that time, God was working in our heart. And we were mucking out houses and doing all this stuff within our neighborhoods. And around Christmas time, we decided, you know what, let's get away for a little bit and let's go back to Vermont and just have some time to where we're not worrying about fixing houses. Because we were literally, it was every day in houses, tearing out sheetrock, tearing out moldy sheetrock, throwing everybody's stuff on the side of the road. You would walk down the side of the roads and it was just full of mold and people's things. And so we went to Vermont. And we still have friends that are in Vermont. Cammie still has, the majority of her family that lives there. I still have some family there. So we went to Vermont just to relax. And while we were there, we went to a church. And while I was sitting in the church, I looked around, and this had been a church that we had gone to 20 years prior when we were in high school. And I knew every single person in the church. There was 2 new people and a new pastor. And I remember God just breaking my heart and thinking, it's been 20 years. And there's 2 new people. And I remember talking to Tyler, and we were talking about just the churches that we knew of that had closed their doors or they had shut down, and all the different things like that. Vermont, the landscape, the spiritual landscape of Vermont is just so cold. We talked about different church planners that had come to the area and that had shut down, that couldn't make it in that area. And I remember we were just talking. At this point, I literally had no clue God was breaking my heart to come here. Because my wife and I said when we left Vermont, we're never coming back. I remember in high school having to shovel every single day, and it was like, I'm not doing that ever again. And Cammie had a lot of she had a pretty emotionally abusive life when she was in high school with her stepfather. And so she has a lot of bad memories in Vermont. And so that was an area that she said, I don't ever want to go back to. And so when we were talking about this, it literally did not ever click to me. You're thinking of a place to go plant. And God's breaking your heart for this place. It didn't hit me. And I remember we were driving home back to North Carolina, and I said to Cammie, I said, man, someone needs to come here. It's going to be tough. And she was like, yeah, you're right. So we get home. A month later, I'm laying in the bed of a borrowed home, and it was 3 a.m, and I could not sleep. And I told you, I had been praying through, where are we going to go church plant? A couple places had come to mind, and I have a couple people that I was, mentors of mine that I was talking to about places that we wanted to go. And I was reading a book by Ed Stetzer called Viral Churches, and in it he talks about how some church planners do very well when they helicopter in somewhere. And they don't really know the area, but it's going to take them about a year to 1.5 years before they get acclimated to the area, acclimated to the people. It takes them a long time to get used to a place before they can actually become truly effective in that area. And he said a lot of times what's more helpful is if you go to a place that maybe you said you would never go back to. And I was like, whoa, that would be Vermont. And it was in that moment that I realized, like if you ever looked back on your life and been like, oh, I see now where God was moving and how he was putting specific things in place, and how did I not see that? And that was when I finally realized, it's Vermont. Which then made me think, what's my wife going to think? Because remember, she has some really bad experiences in Vermont. I didn't think she would ever go back to Vermont. And the next morning, I remember I didn't sleep that whole night. I was waiting for my wife to wake up so I could tell her. And she woke up. I was getting coffee, and she walked out. And the first thing she said to me, we talked about Boone because it's like Vermont. Would you ever consider going back there? I was like, how are you in my head right now?
And I said, let me tell you about last night. And so I explained to her what God had been doing, and I had been researching all night looking up the statistics of Vermont. And I found out through statistics about Vermont, you can look them up, that Vermont is one of the least churched, Burlington, Vermont is one of the least church cities in all of the U.S., that they're the most liberal cities in all the U.S. And it broke my heart looking at the amount of people that were there without a church and the coldness of Vermont, and that they really don't care that people look at them as that way. They don't care that that people call them post-Christian. They have no need for Christ. And they would tell you that they have no need for a church here. What do we need? Why? They say, I hear it all the time. Oh, what do you Southerners all come up here and want to change us? And I'm like, hold on, I'm not a Southerner. I'm from here. So that is, by the way, that's a thing that God is using in our life, because I am from Vermont. And Vermonters do not like people Southerners especially, coming up to Vermont to try to change who they are. So we have going for us that both my wife and I are from Vermont. So we started, then God started showing us thing after thing of reinforcing this calling. I remember my middle son, 2 days after that, we were sitting in the living room, and he said, hey, we should move back to Vermont. I was like, did you tell him? Kim was like, no. I was like, why would you say that? And he said, I don't know, I want a shovel. I was like, that's just his mind works that way. He's like, I just want to buy a shovel and use it. I was like, you're going to regret that statement. And he has regretted that. So thing after thing that God has done in our life to show us that it's Vermont. And so we're in Vermont now. We moved into Vermont in September of this last year, just before the school year started. And here's our vision for Vermont. Let me share with you what we have planned in Vermont. And it's huge. And it scares me every time I say it. 10 churches in 10 years. Let me share with you something real quick. Me, just Dan Houghton himself, that will never happen. I'm not capable of doing that. But God is. And so our vision is to plant 10 churches in 10 years. Let me share with you this, though. Our plan is not to build 10 buildings. The building is the last thing on our list. Our goal is to go there and make disciples. We know that Vermont is an area that if you come in and just put a building in and expect people to come, it's going to fail. Our plan is to go and make disciples, and there's 10 of us right now on our leadership team. We've got another couple that came with us, Brooks and Jennifer Phillips. They'll be moving here this summer. My parents, which is an answer to prayer, a huge answer to prayer. My parents are actually moving back there this year to help us launch this. We've got a family that actually moved from Arizona that met us. They moved there right before we got there, found us on Facebook, and fell in love with our vision. And they're so integral in our church planting. And then some really good friends of ours from high school that I graduated high school with are part of our launch team. And so our plan is for the 10 of us to find someone and to disciple them. To find somebody that's far from God, to build a relationship with them, to see them come to Christ, and to then start to disciple them. That, in 2 years, looks like we're a failure of a church. If you were to judge us by the standards that most churches get judged by, which is numbers and buildings, we will look like a failure in 2 years. But if you play that out, and you play out every person finding one person a year to see them come to Christ, in 10 years, that's 10,000, over 10,000, 10,240 people. Now, granted, I understand that that's in a perfect world if every single person every single year found one person and discipled them. We'll be fine with 500 people. We'll be fine honestly, we'll be fine. I told, when I talked to you guys on the board, when I announced that we were going, I said, you know what, we will be happy if one person accepts Christ by us going there. But our goal is 10 churches within 10 years. Vermont is not an area that a big church will ever thrive. Churches in that area typically are around 50 to 100 people. And so our goal is to have disciples made in specific cities within Vermont. There are some bigger cities within Vermont that we are going to target after we launch a healthy church in Burlington. Burlington is the bigger city. We want to have a healthy church there. And then we want from the very beginning for people to understand that church is not just about you attending a service. That being a Christian, being a disciple of Christ is actually doing something. That being a disciple of Christ actually means that you are a disciple of Christ and you are going to make other disciples. And so our goal is to launch out 9 other churches from the church that we launch. That will be autonomous churches, that could be micro churches to where there's 5 to 10 people, and it could be a bigger church that has 50 to 100 people. Our goal, though, is to find pockets within Vermont and to plant a group of Christians that will then spread the gospel and create disciples of Vermont. So here's our plan of how we do that. Our goal is a couple different ways. One is in person. So our goal is to build relationships with people, starting right where we are in Burlington, Vermont. I don't know if you know that there's a pandemic happening, but it is very difficult to plant a church during a pandemic, especially in a state to where it is so closed. I told your pastor when I walked into the church, this is weird for me. I have not seen people's faces since I've been in Vermont, and I'm very serious about that, besides my own family. It is a very, very closed state. People literally drive with masks on. They're also very outdoorsy. So even outdoors, like if you're on a trail somewhere, people are wearing masks, and if they don't have a mask on, as soon as they see you, they'll pull it up. And so I say that, like, I'm fine with that. If you want to be safe, that's completely fine with me. It's just weird to see people's faces. And it's even weirder to be able to shake someone's hand, because that does not happen in Vermont. Vermont is a very closed state. So right now, they just lifted the restrictions a little bit on Friday, which is awesome. But the restrictions have been that you cannot eat with another family, that you cannot have another family to your house, you cannot go walking with another family. That you have to, the only people you're supposed to be around are your own family. And they have actually a number that you can call to complain on people if they have someone over to their house. If you have a neighbor that has someone else's car, they have a number that you can call to complain on them. It's a very closed area right now. So for us, with the game plan of meeting people and not just building a church, but actually building relationships, that's very difficult when no one will look at you and no one will talk to you. So our goal right now is to still do that, a personal relationship with people, but we've also layered into that a digital strategy to where we're going to where people are. And right now in Vermont, people are online. People are in groups, and they're gathering still in groups online. And so we are, as the 10 of us on our leadership team, our plan is to go where they are. We're going into Facebook groups and just commenting on people's stuff and trying to build relationships with people online at this point. And that's different. But you know what? It's working. We've made multiple connections with people online. And then our third strategy is through our community. My family is, I don't know how to portray how passionate we are about foster care. We are foster parents. We have been for a while. And our goal is to be a church that is for foster families. And we are right now making connections with the foster care community within our city. And so we've been talking with our DCF and talking about different things that we can do and how we talked with them about, if a church were to partner with you, what would that look like? What needs can we meet? And so they said, you know what, one of the biggest needs that we have is somewhere to store things. And we don't have, people want to donate stuff all the time, and we don't have the manpower or the facilities to be able to store the things that people want to give. And so if you guys could store something, then that would be awesome. We could then have everyone contact you. And I was like, hold on, so we would be the contact person for that? She said, yeah, what would be perfect is if you could have the storage facility, and then anybody that gets a new placement, I'll give them your number, they'll contact you to see what you have. I was like, that's perfect. So we are now in the process, we're getting a storage facility to be able to do that. God has opened doors so that every person that gets a new foster care placement will give us a call. And do you know how cool that is as a person that wants to support people that are doing foster care, to have every person that gets a new foster care placement in their home to call me and say, hey, we're getting a new placement. I want to know what it is that you can give to us. And for us to be able to share, you know what? Yeah, we've got this, this, and this, and we're going to bring it right to your house, and let me share some other things with you. So that's an awesome door that's opening up right now. We're also planning an event this summer to where it's called a Connection Day, which our church name is Connect Church. It's a connection day to where we're going to connect foster families with people in the community that want to support foster families. So one of the other things that was told to us by our city officials and by the foster care facility was that it's a high turnover rate for when people go into foster care and they get their first placement, and then they don't do it again once they have their first placement. And so there's a high turnover rate. And she said it's because people don't have a community, they don't have connections with other foster families, and they don't know that there's other people that want to support them. And so we're putting this day together in our community that right now we're in the very beginning planning stages of this to be able to connect foster families with businesses in our community. And so that's our plan. That's what we are planning to do to launch this church. And I want to share with you our reason. Our reason is because we know that this is a commandment from God. Last year in January, we got a foster placement. And I won't say their names, only because I think you guys live stream. I won't say their names to keep them anonymous. But we had a little boy who was 4 years old, and his sister, his half-sister, who was 9 years old, placed in our home. And I don't have time to go through some of the things that these kids experienced in their life. Little boy had deep scars around his neck from being hung multiple times. The little girl had a stab mark all the way through her face that was fresh through her cheek. The temper tantrums and the cuss words and the craziness that they brought into our life blew us away. That a 4-year-old knew more cuss words than I did, and I was in the military. To see what they had gone through, and then to then see God bring them out of that. To see a child who the social workers told us they were going to take him from us because he needed to be medicated and put in a straitjacket because of just the trauma that he had gone through and almost split his personality. And to watch that happen in our life. And then to then show them the love of Christ and to bring them into our home and give them stability and give them love, and to watch them go from what they had been to seeing the little girl go to camp at our church. And the camp happened to be at Southeastern that year. And to have Matt Berry call me back and say, "Bro, she just accepted Christ." And then to see the 4-year-old in the back seat of our car when no one's watching, lifting his hands, praising God. That to us is worth it. And here's what we know. When we were researching Vermont right now is overrun with foster care placements. They don't have enough homes for them to go to. They're literally shipping them to other states. And you know this as well as I do, that this is happening everywhere, that the pandemic is a pressure cooker for bad situations. And so to make it even worse, these kids that used to be able to go to school to get away from a home environment that was bad are now always home, and they don't have any type of a relief anymore. And the situation is getting worse and worse. And we know that there's multiple cases, just like the case that we had, that are happening, and literally this is happening all over. This is happening right around us right here. But God has broken our heart for Vermont. And we cannot wait to see stories of life change that happens in Vermont. We can't wait to see families that are restored. We can't wait to see, like the family that we got to share the gospel with their parents, who when I walked up to him for the first time, which, by the way, if I were to show my love, it would look a lot like hate. I got to show the love of Christ through me, though, because it's only because of Christ that I was able to share love to these kids' parents. And I remember when I walked up to him and I shook his hand, I looked him in the eye. He had his head down, a 6'7" man, huge. He walked up to me with his head down. I shook his hand and I said, "It's good to see you. I've been praying for you." And he looked up at me and said, "How can you be so nice to me?" And I said, "Well, there's a reason why, and his name is Jesus. And the only reason why I can show you love is because he's shown me love." And I was able to share the gospel with him. And that story and that family, who they ended up, the kids ended up going back to other family members. And I don't know how that story is going to turn out. Here's what I do know. We were able to be a part of their story. And we want to be a part of other stories all over the place. And our goal is to see people in our church become foster families, become respite care families, to care for the kids that are in most cities overlooked. And it was told to me a long time ago. My dad said, "You know what? If you're going to preach to broken people, because they know they need salvation." I know you've heard this before, that in order to get someone saved, you got to first get them lost. Because if they don't know that they need Christ, they don't need Christ. And our goal is to find broken families and to share hope with them, to share love with them, to share Christ with them, and to see families restored the way that God intended them to be. And so that's our goal. And I told you, Acts 1:8. Let me go through this really quickly with you. This is a chapter that changed my life. In Acts 1, we'll start at verse 6. And this is, very quickly, this will take me 5 minutes. This is the moment right before Jesus ascends back to heaven. So Jesus has already done his earthly ministry. He's been crucified and he's risen from the grave. And he is now showing himself to some of his disciples. And in this moment, it is right before he ascends back to heaven. And this group of people has gathered to hear what Jesus is going to say. And they say to him, the disciples say, and starting in verse 6, "When they therefore were come together, they asked of him, saying, Lord, will thou at this time restore again the kingdom of Israel?" Here's basically what they were saying. We understand what's about to happen. Persecution is about to come. And so they're thinking, okay, we got it. Jesus is about to right now restore the kingdom of Israel so that we don't have to go through any of that. Watch Jesus' response. He says, "And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the times or the season which your Father hath put in his own power." Here's basically what he said to them. It's not for you to know. You may have plans. You may have things that you think are going to work out best. But it's not for you to know. Here's what he's saying. Here's what God said. I think he's saying to them, and he's saying to us. You got to trust me completely. That even when you have no clue what's coming up, even when all of your belongings, which was when this happened for me, when all of your belongings are on your front yard because you had to pull them all out of your house from a flood, even when you have no clue how it's going to work, even though you have this vision of 10 churches in 10 years and you don't know how that's going to happen, I want you to trust me. Even through a pandemic, I want you to trust me. I have better plans. And then he keeps going. He says, "But you shall receive power after the Holy Ghost has come upon you." I love that he doesn't just say, it's not for you to know. He also says, but I'm going to give you this power. And as Christians, this power is the Holy Spirit. This power is given to every Christian. The same power that rose Jesus from the dead is the power that we hold as Christians. And so many times I see Christians that go through life and are just like, you ask them how they're doing, they're like, I'm doing good. It's a good day. And we don't expect anything big to happen in our life. We're just trying to get through the day. I don't think that many Christians understand the power that they hold and the power that lies within Christ living inside of you and the power that you have to expect huge things. God expects us to expect big things from him. There's a missionary, William Carey, that said, "Expect great things from God and attempt great things for God." It's not in our power, but in God's power that we're able to make history-changing difference in the world. Expect huge things. And then he continues on, he says, and ye shall be witnesses unto both Jerusalem and in Judea and in Samaria and into the uttermost parts of the earth. Here's what he's saying here. Be bold. We are so caught up in safety. I mean, I remember, and I know some of you remember, playing on playgrounds that were steel and concrete. And now everything's rubberized, and no one can get hurt. I remember riding in the back of a station wagon with had no seatbelts and the seat facing backwards and impalements all around us. And now safety is one of our number one priorities. And I think safety is some Christians' number one priority. And Jesus here specifically is telling his disciples to go to places. I don't have time to go through them, but the places that he tells them to go, they're going to be murdered. Like, he doesn't tell them, okay, now that I'm leaving, I want you guys to be safe, and I don't want any harm to happen to you. I want you guys to, go build your little compound over here, and you guys hang out until I come back, which is what a lot of Christians end up doing. We create these Christian bubbles that we only experience Christian people, and we don't see any unsaved people. We don't deal with any unsaved people. We have our own Christian bubble, and we try to keep safe, and we don't do anything to ruffle anybody's feathers. But God is telling us here, be bold. And when I read through this, and I was reading through this right before it was, because going to Vermont is a very difficult area to plant a church, and I was thinking, man, it would be so much easier to stay in the Bible Belt and plant a church. Going to Vermont, they're not going to like me. I'm a type of person, I like people to like me. And so reading this God was saying, man, number one, trust me completely. Expect some big things to happen and be bold. And that's my challenge to you today. Trust God. We're all going through a pandemic right now that's crazy. Some people don't know what's coming over this next year. Trust God. I can promise you, he has your best interest. Expect some big things. Don't just go through life expecting, you just to live an average life. You are a Christian that has been designed to live an extraordinary life, to see huge things happen because God lives through you. And then be bold. Be a group of people that is bold for Christ. So why Vermont? Because we're choosing to do those three things. And we're choosing to see lives changed, and we're choosing to allow God to do something through us even when we feel incapable of doing them. So that's my challenge to you as well. Be prepared to allow God to do something huge in your life. And be ready for it to happen. Because as soon as you say, God, I'm all in, he starts doing these things in your life that blow you away. And I have a whole list of things. I started writing them down. I have a whole list of things. It's just called God moments that have happened since I gave my life 100% to Christ and said, you know what, I'm going to live fully for you. There's things that happen that, man, I can't explain to other people. The only explanation is God did that. And that's where I want to live. I want to live in the places to where I can't explain things that happen in my life except through God. Let's pray. Dear God, Lord, I thank you so much for who you are. God, I thank you so much for everything that you've done in my life. God, for the